we're Experimental Engineering, Team 3, Section 3, and today we'll be talking about determining soil moisture using soil electrical properties. Before we go ahead and dive on in, let's go over some background. When dealing with irrigation and crop control in semi-arid systems, analyzing bare soil evaporation and the effects soil moisture has on these systems in a low-cost manner is critical. Our primary goal is to evaluate the effectiveness of the resistive and capacitive soil moisture sensors. Through field deployment and an in-lab calibration process, we investigated the stability and accuracy of the sensor signal over 24 hours, analyzing deviations and how time-related responses and temperature dependency affected these readings.
Two moisture sensors were used for our experiment, a capacitive moisture sensor and a resistive one. We also included a thermistor to monitor the soil temperature. We then built calibration curves for each of the sensor and compared the sensor's performance during our field deployment. Note that the resistive sensor is prone to corrosion as we are driving current through the probes. We tried tackling this problem using two ways. First is by only supplying current through the probes when taking measurements, and second by supplying an alternating current through the probes. Here are the circuit diagrams that we used for our experiment. To model the alternating current through the resistive sensor, we periodically switch the high and low on the digital pins connected to the circuit.
Soil resistance and soil moisture are related exponentially as characterized by the following equation. Because of the relation moisture content and conductivity have, the sensors require careful calibration, as the capacitive sensor is heavily influenced by soil type and the resistive sensor is impacted by varying ion concentration levels. The calibration process consisted of drying the soil at 105 degrees Celsius for 3 to 8 hours, moving it to a container, and measuring the voltage output of the moisture sensors at various moisture levels in 10% increments until the soil reached peak saturation. The calibration data was then used to find an equation that relates the sensor output with soil moisture. This process was repeated in different temperature ranges.
This is the data that we got from our 24-hour field deployment where we measured the change in soil moisture due to evaporation. It is worth noting that each site used a different soil type and had different environmental conditions such as temperature, light intensity, and humidity, all of which affects evaporation rate. Thus, each site shows a different change in soil moisture over time. However, we would expect that the moisture level for all 4 deployments to be mostly decreasing, which is not what we see. Furthermore, the sensors in all 4 deployments seem to show some correlation with temperature. To investigate this, we analyzed temperature dependency of the sensors and also looked for possibility of interference between the two sensors.
In order to characterize the temperature dependence, we developed calibration curves at 5 and 20 degrees Celsius for both the capacitive and resistive sensors. The difference between the 5 and 20 degree curves is quite significant for the resistive sensor. Emphasizing temperature correction is especially important for accurate use of that sensor. In order to correct for the temperature dependence, we used a simple linear interpolation between the two calibration curves. When we applied this correction to the resistive sensor, we saw a significant decrease in fluctuations. This can be seen by comparing the orange, uncorrected data to the purple, corrected data. Shifting now to the capacitive sensor, when we compare the uncorrected data, seen in blue, to the corrected data, seen in yellow, it is clear that the correction does not eliminate the fluctuations. This suggests either our simple 2-point calibration did not fully capture the temperature dependence of the capacitive sensor, or there is an external cause other than the temperature dependence that explains these fluctuations, such as microcontroller reference voltage fluctuations or sensor interference between the resistive and capacitive sensors.
To investigate on whether there is interference between the two sensors, we did Fourier analysis. The two pictures on the left are the raw readings from the two sensors and their extracted noise by calculating their difference from the moving average. Converting them into the frequency domain, we got the two spectrums on the right. We calculate their correlation coefficient to be 0.61 with a p-value of 0, which means there is no correlation between the noise from the two signals. That rejects our major hypothesis. Another interesting discovery we made was that our resistive sensor has time-related response. There are two types of time-related responses, both first order. The first one comes from turning on and off the sensor, and the second one from switching the direction of the current. The second one is much slower. After fitting these responses using MATLAB, we found their time constants. Plotting them against the moisture, we got these two plots. In average, turning on and off the sensor has a time constant of 43 milliseconds, and switching the current direction has a much longer time constant of 15.5 minutes. A straightforward way to think about this would be it takes an hour for the value to reach 98% of the steady state.
Our experiment shows that there are several confounding factors that complicate accurate measurement of soil moisture using low-cost sensors. Future work to be done includes further investigation on the fluctuations in the capacitive sensor readings, since we found that it is not due to interference from the resistive sensor. Another work to do is further investigation on how the time constant of the resistive sensor changes with moisture level, so that we can create a mathematical model. And lastly, after putting these together, we can use these low-cost moisture sensors for bang-bang or PID control in an irrigation system.